What the voters said really is a warning signal to Likud, a warning signal to the ruling party, said, you are not in line with what the public wants.
Dr. Gissin served as a media and strategy advisor to Ariel Sharon, former Prime Minister of Israel, from 1996 to 2006. He became one of Israel's leading spokespersons and analysts to the foreign press and international community. His distinguished career in the Israeli Defense Forces includes involvement in the planning and implementation of the Sinai withdrawal and the peace accord with Egypt. During most of the 80s and 90s, including the First Lebanon War, the First Intifada in the territories, and the Gulf War of 1991, Dr. Gissin served as Deputy IDF spokesman responsible for the foreign press. He also served as special consultant to the Israeli delegation to the Madrid Peace Conference 1991, as well as subsequent negotiations with Palestinian and Arab delegations in Washington, D.C.
I believe it was Churchill that said that, democracy is the most cumbersome, perplexing form of government, but all the others are worse. So if there is some consolation after seeing the results of the election in Israel, it's what Churchill said about government, because it could be much worse. Not that the results are any good. I mean, you ask who's the winner in those elections, and I can only point out that I think the loser is the Israeli public. This has to do a lot, and this also will tie very nicely into the issue of, will there be a third Intifada? What will be the future of the political process? I believe it was Kissinger who said that, in a moment of frustration when he met Golda Meir in 1974, and, the negotiations with Syria were not going very well. By the way, that was the only agreement that lasted so long. Now, even now, when Assad is about to fall, it's still holding. And he said, Israel has no national security policy, no foreign policy, only domestic politics. Well, we are now in the midst of a domestic politics quagmire, if you want, the election. It's not the election so much as the aftermath of the election. We are, the Jewish people, are very smart people. We have this tendency to take difficult problems, complex problems, and make them insoluble. My cynicism comes from very long years of experience with the government. It's the best government, or the best form of government for representation. Probably one of the worst for implementation. When you have 5.5 million voters, that was the number, okay? 34 lists, 34 competing for 120 seats in parliament, 15 get into the system, get beyond the threshold, the 2% threshold, and then at the end of the day, whereas the Arabs would say, ubaded, and then what? Then you have to form a government, a coalition government. And when you take a quick survey of the problems facing us, Iran, nuclear weapons, Iran, hostile takeover of the Middle East, the imminent possible collapse of the regime in Syria, and Syria falling into its component parts with Al-Qaeda on our borders on the north, and Al-Qaeda in the south, and Al-Qaeda in Sinai, and you say, well, now you have to make decisions, And on top of that, on top of everything, a global economic crisis, what I call the global autumn. We had the Arab Spring, the Iranian Islamic winter, and the global autumn. And the global autumn continues throughout the world and everything. And it affects also the Arab countries and affects our neighbors. And now you need a government that could make decisions. And now, for the next 3 months, I'm very cautious about it. Nothing. Time out. Nothing. We are engaged in trying to establish a government. And it's not sure that after the government is established, that government can actually take action or take a political initiative, which is definitely necessary. So hold your horses. If you think about a political process, and if you think about solving problems once the government is in power, forget about it. Even if there is a government, and it could be one or two options, either a government skewed to the rights, which will be a stalemated government, only to survive with 62 members. They take Bennett, take the religious ultra-Orthodox, and take Shas, and maybe even with Yair Lapid. Then you really have a government that's skewed to that. And the one thing, they could deal with one issue at the time. And this is the most central issue, because the economic crisis in the world created that deficit in the budget. In America, they call it a fiscal cliff. We have a fiscal hole, not a cliff, a hole of 39 billion shekels. 39 billion shekels, what would be like divided by 4, like $10 billion, worth of a deficit. We have to cut it down by half. So $5 billion or 14, 15 billion shekel, you have to cut it from someplace. And the last thing you want to do after election is increase taxes. So you have to do some cuts in the budget, in the office, and cuts in services. That's not very popular, particularly now that after the election, Israel is a country that imbued with a sense there is a need to solve the social issues, or to put more emphasis on social than on the national security or on that, because it's part of domestic politics, not because anyone really thinks this is an issue of life and death in Israel, but now it is a major issue because of the political setup, because of the kind of vote, that what the voters said, we want a different government. What the voters said really is a warning signal to Likud, a warning signal to the ruling party. Said, you are not in line with what the public wants. You're too much to the right. You got to move back to the center in order to capture the center. In order to capture the center of the political map. And it's not sufficient. In Israel, we always used to say, if you want to reach, the ruling party, Likud, and reach power, you have to capture the center of the central committee of the Likud. No, that's not enough. Today you have to capture the center of the political map in Israel. That's where the voters are. Or you skew to the right, then you're not a centrist party. Sharon was able, through his personality, to get the centrist forces in one party. As long as he was alive, as long as he was in power. Once he moves off the stage, you see Kadima disintegrates to splinter elements, and you've all seen them in who are the splinter elements? You had Yesh Atid, Lapid, Kadima, which was just what's ever left of it, Livni with Hatnua. So that possibility of having a political framework that would unite the centrist forces in Israel, which are the majority, are not there. But that political organization was not there. But the voters are. And the voters are the suckers. See, in Israel, there's a large majority of suckers. Freiling, they call it in Hebrew, okay? I didn't find a better word to translate what freiling means, because freiling is an Israeli word. It doesn't belong in any other language, and not in the vernacular of any other political system. But in Israel, it's a major force. The freiling, if I have to give you an historical analogy, it's the gallows ships. The gallows ships that the Roman had two decks. On the lower decks, they would have the slaves tied, with chains, row the boats. On the upper deck, the patricians would sit and bask in the sun of Sicily. And the ship would not go unless you row. Because they had one sail, but what happened when you don't have wind and the Mediterranean sometimes is flat? You have to keep rowing. And these guys continued to row to the beat of the drum. They rowed the boat in bad weather, in good weather, in war, in peace. This is the people who are revolting today. These are the people that voted for Lapid, for example. I belong to that group. They say in Israel, by the way, forgive me my cynical approach, but I'm telling you that's because I've been there before. In Israel, actually, the country is comprised of 3/3. 1/3, maybe 200, 300,000 people who are carrying the military burden. They are the ones who, go to Miluim, to reserve duty. They are the ones who are holding the thing. 1/3, okay, who are carrying the industry. those in the high-tech business, those in the and in industry, those who are entrepreneurs and, move it along. By the way, you look at Bennett, he was both. He was both in the military, in the elite unit, and then became, a high-tech entrepreneur. And then there's another third, one-third, who goes to academy, to the universities, to Weizmann Institute, who do the research, who are the infrastructure from which we grow the Nobel Prize winners. Except one thing, it's the same one-third. It's a one-third of the country that is doing all those things, carrying the burden on its shoulder. So when Lapid comes and said, in a very broad sense, I'm not looking now at the politics of it, sharing the burden, of course he has a very receptive ear and heart and mind of those people who have been suckers, who've been doing always carrying the burden. And when there's a need to increase taxes, of course, who do you tax? You tax those people. Overtaxed, underrepresented, young. So then they become young and restless and sometimes hopeless, and they don't trust the political party. Whenever comes a new messiah, a new guy, very good looking, very nice speaking, and says, I'm your representative, I represent, and goes, on one issue, that issue of equalizing the burden, that overtakes the political agenda. And now when Netanyahu will have to establish a government, and the fact that he didn't make it to 40 mandates means he doesn't have the critical mass in order to have a party where, you can't be, he has to change his political agenda. Whether he had a notion of improving the economy, whether he had a notion of starting with the political process, first of all, they say, take care of us. And the natural representative of that is, of course, Mr. Lapid, who says, what these people were saying. For so many years, we never asked what the country can do for us. We always asked, what we can do for the country. That ends now. Now we're asking, what is the country going to do for us? That's paraphrasing Kennedy, of course. Yeah, what can you do for us? We've been doing all the time for these people, and I can understand the frustration of these people. And my brother and my son, they belong to this group of people. They do reserve duty, they do this. I also do reserve duty, but they're younger, they're 30 years younger. And then they say, listen, we've given our life, we love this country, but what are we getting in return, Sometimes we're like Alice in Wonderland, when she goes, the rabbit asks her, why should I keep running? He says, keep running to stay in one place. And they're not even staying in one place, they're going backwards. And they develop those macabre, cynical jokes. They said, we can't finish the month with the salary that we're working. We're getting a salary. We can't finish the month because of the standard of living, because of the cost of housing, which is one important element. And so then they said, but we understand that Netanyahu had a solution. He established a committee to examine the problem. And the committee came up and said, we don't know. We don't know how to increase the salaries for these people. But we have another suggestion. We are going to establish a committee to see if we can shorten the month. If we shorten the month, then they'll finish the month. Now, I'm telling you this just to indicate, the kind of sort of alienation or frustration that happens to these young people. Now, the reason I focus on this group, because this ties into the larger picture of the Middle East. What's happening in the Middle East? What's happening with the Arab Spring? What is the Arab Spring really? It's a confluence of two revolutions. The demographic revolution, which is also taking place in Israel, and the technological revolution of Facebook, internet, and the cyber revolution, if you want, that changed the perception in the world. Now, what happened is that this is a critical mass, politically speaking, whether in democratic countries or not democratic countries, even in the territories. These are young people. Now, you see, I give you a statistic which is appalling. 20% of the 300 million people, Arabs, including that 8 billion Jews and Arabs who live in Israel, that's nothing. But the 300 billion, 20% of them are between the age of 14 and 25. Restless, hopeless, jobless, and they want everything now. Why? Because they're educated. And they have a technology that enables them to look and to connect with each other. In order to make revolutions, you needed organic solidarity. People should meet and see that they have common interest and that they have a leader that speaks to them. You don't need that any longer. With the social networks, with the internet, with Facebook, with Twitter, with all those blogs that you have, You can create cyber solidarity when people who don't even know each other are motivated and mobilized to collective action immediately. And sometimes under the nose of the government who does not have the intelligence to find it out. One of the things that I pointed out when I was recently in an exercise in the West Bank, I said, if we don't sit on their social networks, we're not going to go if there's going to be an intifada or not. We have to sit there to watch, to listen. And their language is not always your language. You know, if you look sometimes at the young people who communicate in this language and you see how they write, it's like hieroglyphic. This is like Egyptian hieroglyphic. Yeah. I mean, smiley faces, and then you know, exclamation marks and everything. You know, love for you. That's the new language. But they communicate with each other. Excellent. And there's so much, I think, solidarity in this and force. Now, I don't know how long it's going to last, but it's the kind of force that when it comes vectored, you know, into a political system, it creates havoc. Like an elephant in a china shop. Mindless, but very forceful. And speaking out of their frustration, out of the fact that they've studied. And I give you one example, two examples. One thing, that I met a guy, you know, who was an engineer, who studied engineering in Al-Azhar University in Cairo. And he finished, he had a master's degree in mechanical engineering or electrical engineering, I forgot. And I asked him, how are the prospects, you know, of the job? He said, listen, I don't want any job in the government as an electrical engineer. I want to be a garçon in the Hilton Hotel. I said, what? Yes, because from the tips I get from there, I get more than I get a year's salary from the government. Money. And the other Palestinian I met in the territories, just recently when I visited there, and I was in good talk because I served as a spokesman for the army in the territories for 10 years. 2 intifadas. And he says to me, once, every morning we woke up, we spoke about Palestine. We wanted Palestine. Now, every morning we wake up, we say, where are we going to get the next sack of flour? Food. Now that's the problem. That's underlying the whole Arab Spring, which a lot of people portrayed it in your romantic notion. Oh, they want democracy. No, first of all, they want to be fed. They're hungry. A guy burned himself in Tunisia, which ignited this Arab Spring throughout the world because of economic conditions. And so that's the basic issue. Now, the problem is that Israel has the solutions. It has the technological solution, the agricultural solution, to solve these problems of the Middle East. I mean, we're not the problem, we are the solution to the Middle East. But, time out, now we have a problem, we have to decide what we want to do when we grow up and how we're going to manage the thing, and the whole world can wait. Obama can wait, the peace process can wait, it's not going to happen. What do you do meanwhile? You have to manage the conflict, manage the situation. Everybody said, well, if there's no two-state solution, there's going to be war. No, not war. Now it's going to, the real critical issue will be, are we be able to manage the conflict in order to prevent an outburst of violence or not? Or are we going to succumb to a new burst of violence? So it's not, the option is not between the peace process and complete, I would say, chaos. That's not going to happen. But in between, what are the options that the Palestinians are going to seize? Now, you have to understand, the Israeli side, I explained, you know, they're not going to deal with such, I would say, debatable and crucial issue that cuts across the Israeli society, like the settlements and the agreement with the Palestinian, or a peace agreement with the Palestinian, when the first thing is to try and have a government that can actually function. And the first issue is the economy. It was Clinton who said, it's the economy, stupid. Well, all over the world, globally, it's the economy and nothing else. For countries like Egypt, for the Palestinian territory, by the way, first of all, the economy. And for Israel, too. For Israel, too, because that's what concerns people right now. And the rest of the world, the hell with them. Well, they can wait. I mean, wait till we solve our problems. And it's very pitiful because, again, you know, these are problems which you need to find solutions right away. When you talk about the Palestinian issue, for example, one of the things, you know, as a result of the November 29 decision to recognize a non-member Palestinian state, the Palestinians finally saw they have an option. You know, in the past, they needed Israel. I mean, the Palestinian economy is $4 billion, $5 billion a year. The Israeli economy is $130 billion. Okay, the average income per capita in Israel is $36,000. In Saudi Arabia, it doesn't reach 6,000. Saudi Arabia, Israel is its annual, I would say, per capita income is larger than that of Egypt, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan put together. It's a difference in but it's a different society. I mean, like, how should I explain? You know that Barak, our former defense minister, liked to use very picturesque thing. He says Israel is like a villa, you know, a mansion in the jungle. We live in a jungle, and in the middle there's a villa, you know. So as long as you know, and it has beautiful windows, you know, you look through, you look what you see what's on the other side, but you live inside the villa. I said, no, it's not a villa. If the Middle East is a jungle, and definitely it's become a very rough jungle after the 2 years of the Intifada, Israel is a national park for an endangered species. That's what, in the middle of the jungle, there's a national park. Who's the endangered species? The Jewish people. Why? Because there are hunters and poachers who are trying to... And what do national park rangers do usually? First of all, they build tall fences. Tall fences make for good neighbors, they say. So we had to build a fence along our southern border because of the infiltration, both of terrorists as well as migrant workers, which are going to increase now in numbers like you've never seen in the world. I have to zoom out a little bit for you, just to look. You look today at the Middle East. Well, you look today at Syria. What's going to happen to Syria? What happened to Somalia? Not Singapore, Somalia. Or, if you want, the Lebanonization or Balkanization of Syria. It will fall to its component parts from 100 years ago when they established Syria, when they established Iraq, and they established Egypt. They are falling to their component part. Tribal warfare with 21st century weapons. God forbid, you know, they get their hands also on some of the chemical weapons that they have, weapons of mass destruction, and that's the story that you have there around us. So you have to build tall fences. You have to look and see what's happening. Of all the countries that were concocted, that were thought of on the principle of self-determination that Wilson established in 1918 after World War I, the one that succeeded, the one experiment that succeeded till this day was the fact that in 1922 the League of Nations said, the Jewish people, they have a right to return. They're the natural people, and that's their natural homeland. They have a right to settle in that homeland and build their homeland in Israel. Well, what was left from all these, legitimate regimes? What's left? Only the illegitimate Israeli regime. Illegitimate, that's the only legitimate regime, because it's a natural people on their natural homeland with natural talent, and thank God now also with natural gas. God saw that, we are having some problems. He sent us natural gas. So, it's settled, but that's and all the others are falling apart. With all this riches, Saudi Arabia is not even $6,000 per capita income. Okay, so they have 24, 25 billion people. Okay, but with the riches that they have, so, it's what I'm trying to explain. We have a rich man's problem, okay. But in an environment that is very unstable, very continuously, changing and continuously falling apart, and this period of transition is going to last for at least 15, 20 years right now. You say, what's going to be the solution in Syria? More of the same kind. More fratricide, more killing. Now, even if Assad is gone, the tribal warfare will continue continuously. I finished my studies in political science in 1979, a doctorate in political science, and immediately after finishing, I came back to Israel. I rejoined the army. I also studied in the United States communication. And because the first war of communication was the first Lebanese war, they pulled me out of planning branch and they sent me to Lebanon. I also was participating in the planning of the operation, so I know a little bit about Lebanon. It took me 1 week in Lebanon to forget everything I learned about in political science and in public communication that I did from Newhouse, and relearn what's the real situation. A tribal society where everyone is at everyone's other throat. For how long? For eternity. As long as the tribe exists. And then you have a sort of a framework, a national framework, which is a democracy or a government. There was no consequence. What is of consequence is what you saw in the past 2 years in Syria, massacres, the functionality of massacres. That it's a cynical thing, but in a massacre, you kill the men and the children, and the women and the children first. So they'll understand for generation not to, that's how you achieve the terrace between tribes there. And actually, that's what I said. What happened is that Syria is turning into Lebanon, and Lebanon is turning into Syria now, with the Hezbollah and the Iranians trying to take control of Lebanon, actually, because Syria is falling apart at the seams to its component part. And those components part were there for hundreds of years. There were Druze, there were Alawites, there were Sunni, there were Christians and Kurds, and they'll be fighting each other with the superpowers taking sides with each of these tribes. So in that kind of and you can help sometimes. You can help one faction, you can help another, you can help the refugees, but you can't solve these problems. And that's why I'm saying the best that we can do at the present is manage the situation. And now with the Palestinian in the territories, as I said, the economic issue is very important. So when people came in Israel, and said there's a backlash to the declaration of unilateral declaration of a non-member state to the Palestinian, and the fact that they're going to leverage it and try to bring Israel to the international court. And by the way, if there is a third intifada, it will not be a black intifada, it will not be suicide bombing. They understand it works against them. It's going to be creating the kind of crime scene on the ground, killing 2 or 3 people, establishing an illegal Palestinian settlement like we do, like some of our people do, and then taking it to the International Criminal Court in Hague. It's law warfare, it's cyber warfare, it's a different type of warfare. In my view, even more ominous than when you have to contend with people on the ground itself. Because now they say we'll carry the war to where we have an advantage. We don't have advantage on the ground because the rest of the world is focused on Syria, is focused on that. The Palestinians are no longer the darling refugees of the world. There are other refugees elsewhere. And so how do we get the attention of the world? Oh, there are all sorts of gimmicks. We take Arafat out of his graves and try to pin his death on Israel, not let alone, they forgot in the Arab world that you can't, it's a taboo, you can't say that a leader had AIDS, you can't say it. So there is what they call it mu'amara. Mu'amara means, there is a conspiracy, the Jews are responsible, they poisoned. Or you take the issue to the UN or to a place where there are the limelights, where under the cameras you can see what's happening. And therefore it's baffling, it's frustrating. You try to do something and then you fail. Now, there's another issue here. I told you that the major issue affecting the Middle East today, including in a lesser extent, but including the Palestinian society, is the demographic revolution of young and restless people. This creates a universal or regional problem that is amazing, baffling, amazing, and frightening. Once all these sort of legitimate rulers, control the street by fear, by intimidation, by force. Now the street controls the palace. The Tahrir Square, the people in Tahrir, influence the palace of El-Intifada in Cairo more than the palace influences them. The people in the streets of Amman frighten the palace, the king, and the people in the streets of Syria, they're challenging the palace. And what? The palace still has the same means of coercion, rifles and RPGs and machine guns and bombs and air force. But there's one thing. This young generation broke the fear barrier. The street is not afraid any longer. And the same thing, and as a result of that, the ability to control what is happening in the so-called Arab street is lessening, less and less. And anyone else who will try to control can't control the street. Actually, what was unleashed as a result of the Arab Spring, 2 years of the Arab Spring, is a hungry tiger out of his cage. And the tiger runs around, and every now and then someone tries to jump on the back of the tiger, like the Islamist or the Salafist, and they ride the tiger. But if the tiger is not fed, literally, these people are not fed, he throws the guy off his and then he eats the guy, and the next one will face the same predicament. The hungry tiger has been unleashed in the jungle. And everyone who tries to ride the tiger can ride it for a temporary time and then throw him out. How long would that continue? It's a slow process of, I would say, the ability of the younger generation to actually come into power and organize themselves and change the nature of the Arab countries. But you can't make the leap to democracy in one step. So on the road, you go through chaos, anarchy, theocracy, but not democracy. And in the Palestinian territory, it's the best situation. Why? Because the Palestinians, on the one hand, have learned from Israel how democracy runs. And particularly in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria. Gaza is a different story because of a hostile takeover of Hamas in 2007, so it's a different, separate story. But in the West Bank, they're more highly educated. Their economy was growing in leaps and bounds at 7 to 9%. Now there's a world economic crisis, so they have some problem or some concerns about the future. But it's a flourishing society. And they have something to lose. And so when people were saying, don't pay salaries to the 50,000 policemen, I said, crazy, stupid idiots. I mean, if you want another Intifada, don't pay them salaries. Don't pay them salaries. Because now they are ensuring that there will be security on the street. They're ensuring law and order. I wouldn't say that they're good as the Israeli thing. But with our intelligence, with our support, they're doing the job. They're doing it for their own sake. They're doing it for the sake of the family because they see, as long as they're quiet and no terrorist activity and the society flourishes, people come and bring money, people go and shop, investors come and invest. But if that is gone, but if you don't pay them, and that's critical, the Palestinian Authority is in a critical financial crisis because they haven't gotten all the payment, from the Arab countries who promised them. By the way, the only country that continuously every month sends them, as a result of the Oslo Agreement, the excise taxes we collect, we send it back to them. So those are means by which they would pay their salaries to these people. And that is what I call maintenance of the, because these people understand what they have to do. They were trained in the United States, but the minute you don't pay them, they're not going to be, what they're going to do, they're going to do the same thing that the Iraqi army did, because Bush did a abysmal mistake and dismantled it. These people don't know anything else to do but to toss a gun, to shoot a gun, to use the RPG, to use a Kalashnikov. And if they don't pay them, if the government doesn't pay them, the Palestinian Authority, then some terrorist organization will pay them to do the job. It could be one of the Hamas who's trying to make his way back into the territory. It could be the global Islamic Jihad who is working. It could be various elements of Al-Qaeda who you've seen now how they spread around the world. Everything is global and everything is local. You see that global force really impinging on an issue that is a local issue. And they look around and they see what's happening in the Arab world. And at a certain point in time, the street may run out of control of the government. One of the things is Abu Mazen does not control everything that happens in the street. Even the knowledge of what is happening is quite limited. And we pointed out in some of it to the security services, you've got to sit on their social networks. You've got to listen. You've got to watch what they're saying, because they are the ones who would not act according to what the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority also, when they want demonstration, they can create one. But they don't have the force of creating that kind of demonstration as the younger people, these groups, who are sitting, some guy sitting near a computer and sending those messages to all these people. And then instigating some action that immediately spurs the uprising or the gathering of people in Operation Pillar of Defense, the recent operation we had in Gaza, which also had a lot of impact on the fact that the weakness of the Palestinian Authority compared to the so-called victory, a virtual victory of the Hamas, and they became the heroes of people in the West Bank. But there was an incident there. They captured a couple of, during the operation, a capture of collaborators, people that were working with the Israeli GSS, and they lynched them in the street in front of small cameras that were taking pictures taken by some people, and then they put the pictures on Twitter and on Facebook. And immediately the Hamas leadership, was caught by surprise. They said, no, we're against this. This is not the way to do it. And they condemned it. And Mahmoud Azahar and Abu Barzouk, their leaders, came out immediately and said, to show you that even within the terrorist group, what impact this force has, with the immediately demonstrations in Gaza and against Hamas, because Hamas is now the government, So we have to take into consideration this when you talk about what kind of a war, what kind of an intifada we're facing. And the point is that the people there, the people really would like to have an agreement, would like to reach a solution. But they're frustrated because their leadership is afraid to really take the necessary move. And listen, the Fatah and the Palestinian Authority, they have no other choice. I mean, what is the other choice? The Arab state will throw them under the wheels of the bus. They don't care about the Palestinians. We have a more serious problem. And the real possibility is to make an agreement with Israel. But you can't make an agreement with Israel, when you make those demands that you say, well, we won't recognize Israel, we won't continue. And Israel said, well, we have a longer breathing space. We can breathe longer without the peace with you. What about you? What's going to happen to you the next day when you don't have food on the table? So the one thing is to say, okay, if we commit suicide, we'll bring you down with us. If we don't get what we want, we will dismantle the Palestinian Authority, and then the chaos, and you come in control and do everything that you want. That's another of the tactics. Right now, they haven't gone that far. What they're trying to do is really exploit and leverage whatever they were able to get through the resolution of November 29 and the newly gained stature of the Palestinian as a result of the so-called Hamas victory. And Hamas is going to lick its wounds for a very long time, and that's the thing that gives us quiet there on the border. But nevertheless, it's this kind of victory, and that affects the younger people. The younger people who may decide, at a certain point in time, if there is just a spark, one unintended killing or something that they can hail, and then they'll go out and lash out and do whatever, or enable Hamas to come through the back door into the territory. So if you look at the three factors that I taught, the global economic crisis, the lack of leadership within Hamas and within the Palestinian Authority, and the problem of controlling what is happening on the ground, and the problems that Israel is facing, the third element, the problem that Israel is facing politically and economically, then it's not likely that there will be, in recent years, I'd say, a solution or a two-state solution. That doesn't mean that there won't be, I would say, management elements of how to manage the conflict, and maybe partial interim agreements, economic agreements, or something that would enable the Palestinians at least to live better. But for anyone who looks in the crystal ball and wants to see a sort of a final solution to the Palestinian, forget about it. There's nothing final in the Middle East. It's just an ongoing kaleidoscope of more carnage, because the Middle East for the next 20, 25 years is going to be in this situation. So what we have to do is have to make certain we stay on our surfboard and not slip over it, and try to maneuver between the waves, between the things. And every place there is an opportunity, to make a gesture, to do something quietly, not in public diplomacy. One of the problems, we have leaders on both sides of the ocean who their forte is going out in public and making speeches and making declarations. What you need now is quiet action, Mossad-type people that will do some connections with the Arab countries and try to offer them the kind of economic assistance, agricultural assistance, all technical assistance to keep them afloat, because the Arab world is sinking. I told you, you look into the Middle East, I look into the Middle East 5 years from now, I'm seeing the same processes that is happening in Africa. Starvation, water crisis, food crisis, health crisis in all these countries, because as a result of the Arab Spring, the infrastructure in most of the countries in the Middle East is deteriorating completely. The only one that has a survival suit that can enable it to run, the Ironman run through the desert of the Middle East, is Israel. Now we're ready to give them bottles of water and support them and helping them, but you can't do it publicly. You can't do it publicly. The water crisis in Syria is something that the minute the dust dies down, there will be some I would say, respite in the fighting. You'll see a nation of refugees that have nothing to eat, have no infrastructure, worse than anything else. In a sense, like Somalia. But Syria is not Somalia. Syria is the epicenter of the superpower concern and interest. You have the Iranian involved, the Syrian, the Russian involved. And they'll be ready to continue to fight until the last Syrian for their interest there. And therefore, it's not very promising. Israel can do something, but it has to be quietly. It has to be with a clear notion of trying to identify the people that are there, that you can start talking to them privately, quietly. And you have to have a leader. You have to have a leader that feels that Israel strong enough to look into the future, and say, this is how I'm going to carve Israel's position in this uncertain world that is facing us in the next 10 or 15 years. Unfortunately, on all these counts, when I look, I try to mark a V. Is there world leadership? I'm not sure, question mark. Is there real leadership in Israel? Question mark. If I could mark a V at least on one of these or two of these things, I could be more optimistic in my prediction. But otherwise, I think that we in Israel, will have to learn how to manage this situation. And I believe, I hate that to happen. But if there's a major, I would say, security crisis, whether it's on the Syrian border, or the Egyptian border, or a new uprising in the territories which is supported by Iran, and a deterioration or an escalation on the question of Iran gaining nuclear weapons, then you'll see there'll be a perfect government, a government of national emergency. I hate that to happen because, I could see that there will be some people who were just thinking about it, and after they failed to establish a coalition, say, oh God, give us a little war here and there, unleash some dogs of war so we can get the Israeli people together. I hope that does not happen. I hope, because it's not worth it. But it's a scenario we have to take into consideration. It may happen not because Netanyahu wills it, but because the leaders in Tehran will feel that they're in a bind and they have to ignite another war. And the situation in Syria is not getting any better. The situation in Jordan is not getting any better. And in the Sinai is still another little Afghanistan, on our southern border, with Egypt trying to do something, but having to face other problems that doesn't enable it to really take full action against what's happening there. So we're going to live in a very uncertain world, and this is the time where you actually say, at this time, we wish we had a leader, that could, pull the country together and say, these are the priorities, these are what we have to do, and go for it. Hopefully, if there is a crisis, and Netanyahu may emerge eventually as that person, then definitely, then after he does and leads, and if he does it right, he could actually be able to establish a government and dictate, the agenda to solve the other social problem. Otherwise, he'll be dragged into things, and I'm not sure that he could provide a real solution, which means if that doesn't happen, every 2 years, another election or another government. This is the worst situation that could happen to Israel, to find itself when the Middle East is in such turmoil and shake-up that we don't have our act together. But Jews usually have their act together when everything falls apart, and then they say, wait a minute, okay, now we're going to unite and go fight a little war and then come back and fight ourselves. But you can't fight little wars. The wars drag over. The nature of warfare has changed. So to finish on an optimistic note, maybe, if the situation, and there are all the possibilities that right after the election, all the bad things are going to happen. I mean, the economic situation is not going to alleviate itself immediately. The need to have a budget, which is so difficult, with cuts. And the strategic situation around us in the Middle East is not going to improve. Syria is going, even if it falls apart, you'll still have major threats emanating from the various groups there, and the new rise of global jihadist terrorists you see from Mali to Algeria. This is something of concern to us as well. But that perhaps would enable Bibi to follow in his father's historical footsteps and look straight in the eyes of history and not to the next election and say, now is my chance to do something. I hope that the influence of his father, the historian, will be greater than the influence of his wife.